Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Easterly Wine's weekly tastings. My name is Nick Doherty. I'm the Southern sales rep for Easterly Wine. Joining me today on the side of this view, I don't know which way you'll be looking at it, are Louisa and Steve from Farnum Hill. I'm very happy to have you guys joining. As we were just discussing briefly, I haven't seen you in probably a year and a half, so it's nice to see your faces, and you seem to be well right now. So everything going well?
Sure, in the context of totally weird.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to cancel Gravity next, and we're trying to get ready for that. But otherwise, we're luckier than most people.
Well, good.
Sounds like.
Well, today, basically, what we're trying, we want to make sure that we can introduce the products that we sell for you. As you can see, we all have them in front of us. And basically, let's get a little background about you guys and what Farnum Hill is all about. So I'll let you take it away if you want to kind of give us a brief rundown.
Okay, we are cider makers because we're apple growers. I've been working here since I was a kid in 1965. Louise has been here since I first came here, maybe in 1973, I think. Isn't that right? Anyway, the point is that we've been here for a long time in one form or another, and the whole time it's had to do with an orchard. And for various reasons I won't go into now, we decided in the late 80s and early 90s to take out a huge number of market variety trees, McIntosh, Cortland, and whatever, and replant with cider fruit, or fruit for making alcoholic cider. And this was after a decade of fairly concentrated research on that. Everything we do is based on growing the fruit, and you could almost say we're making cider as an excuse to keep growing apples. So that's, and we had the great fun of bringing up our two sons here. We have had myriad very interesting people work for and with us over the years, and we've had this long period of learning about both how to grow the cider fruit, which is the thing we do, so that was a little easier, and figuring out how to make the sort of cider that we think reflects the land and this place, reflects the place. And by that, we don't mean our hands. We have an extremely kind of hands-off approach to cider making, by which we don't mean we don't keep the stuff clean. And we're quite meticulous, but we don't manipulate much. And we blend for the aromas and flavors that we enjoy in cider, which we can talk about now or whenever you like.
Okay, I've got to cut in with the brags because Steve has failed to brag sufficiently. What he did back in the 80s, when in America the word cider meant a brown juice that lines up with donuts, right? That's what it meant to the public.
Right.
And the thing that didn't come into the introduction here is that the kind of cider apples we planted, no one in the States had heard of. Most of them were English, some of them were French, and they are not grown for eating. And so they have the same kind of standing in the apple world as wine grapes do in the wine world. You can't just pop them in a pie if nobody wants your cider, So it's a fairly strong step away from what amounted to a failing grocery apple market and into a future that we couldn't anticipate. But if you're determined to grow apples, that's the kind you do. That's the kind of thing you do. And a lot of the great New England orchards, the multi-generational orchards at that time, started growing houses, as they say. But we continued to grow apples by planting apples nobody cared about and believing that someday somebody would care about them, and that day came.
Yeah. I mean, I care about them, and I'm very happy that I get to sell them, so thank you for that.
Don't eat them.
I guess without further ado, if you're ready, let's get into it. I'd love to kind of taste down the line. I'm very excited about the still cider in the bag. This is a new product for us.
Where is Eddie?
All right.
All right. We have a collection of glasses here just to point out that you do not need a fancy glass. Our cider, on the scale of things, is fairly fancy cider, but we are not fussy about glasses. However, we were trained in tasting in these classic tasting glasses, so that's what we're going to use. But
Okay,
it's
perfect.
not something you have to use if you don't.
I'm using a beer bubble glass, so we're good.
There you go.
We only use these glasses for work. Not to say that this is isn't nothing but fun.
So this super cool Magnum not only saves a lot of CO2 because it's not as heavy as glass for trucking, and it has a lot of real eco advantages, but it holds 1.5 liters, and it keeps the stuff beautifully separate from the air, unlike a bottle where the airspace develops inevitably when you start to pour it out. So we're pretty enthusiastic about it on the whole. We find that still cider is kind of gaining favor with people. When I'm doing tastings, I say bubbles or no bubbles, and I hear, well, when I used to do tastings before COVID, and people say no bubbles more and more. Anyway, so it's extremely dry, extremely fruity, high acid, good frame of tannins, which come from these weird apples we've been talking about, and a ton of very unexpected fruit notes, not all of them apple, in between. Yeah, I mean, these apples are talented enough to evoke a whole lot of different flavors, the way talented wine grapes evoke a whole lot of different flavors. And we're always saying to people, please don't look for apple flavors any more than you look for grape flavors in your wine, right? You don't want your wine to taste like grape juice, so please don't ask our cider to taste like apple juice.
You're not allowed or shouldn't be taking glass or even maybe aluminum.
I've had plenty of friends reach out about going on kayak and canoe trips with a bag of this lately. So
that's what it's built for. Yeah.
We're not big fans of the kind of sitting around the dinner table coming up with fanciful descriptors, because really,
that's fun.
Cider should support the party. It shouldn't be the object of the party. And our particular ciders are made not only to be enjoyable on their own, but they refresh your palate in a way that sort of acts like monosodium glutamate without, of course, being monosodium. I mean, it really does brighten up the flavors of a wide range of foods. So we don't make like narrow recommendations for pairings, though I would avoid a couple things. I would avoid a sharp tomato sauce because this cider is quite sharp, and that might set up some, wars in your brain. And at the other end of the spectrum, I'm not sure. I've had people say that it's great with rich desserts, and maybe there are some it would be good with, but I would steer away from chocolate mousse with this. I just think it would fight,
Right. Yeah.
But for an awful lot of other things, very spicy things, very subtle things, cheap down market chips and upmarket lobster bisque, it's really, really good.
Yeah. So I remember when I had met with you, this was sort of the still cider is, I mean, for lack of a better word, the thing that you've wanted, like, that you really loved making the most. And maybe you could go into that a little more if you have any information.
We love making it the most because we don't do anything to it.
Yeah.
This is just straight up cider. We blended it it's all of our ciders
across apple varieties.
Blending across varieties, right? We ferment. We very rarely ferment a variety on its own, except for a few varieties that we use just for blending for a particular attribute. But all of our ciders are intended to be blended after their fermentation, fermented. I mean, blended at racking and then blended and then blended. And by the time it gets to this stage, the stage of any of these things, we've lost track of the variety, the proportions. We're doing it all with our noses and our mouths.
Yeah.
One of our standards is we want to make something that we like and that we think reflects the orchards. It's not that we don't care whether everybody else likes it, but we know that we can't be very good at making something if we don't really like it ourselves, which is why our ciders are acidic and dry and they have all those weird fruits and not too much apple. It's also why we like making still cider.
I would agree, but I mean, I always go for dry cider, so that makes sense.
We look for sweetness, but the sweetness we look for is just either that thing called implied sweetness or the sweetness imparted by unfermentable sugars like the other photosynthates. And, when we talk about sweetness to most people about our ciders, they laugh. So, are we pulling corks out of this thing?
Yeah, we can do that. So yeah, we're moving on to the
wonderful sound.
maybe with this, we can talk a little bit. I mean, it's on the back of all the products, but the cider grown label is
Oh, funny, you should mention that.
Percent from apples grown for cider, ripened fully, pressed in season, fermented slowly. But the main point is we were trying to find a mark that we have shared with some other cider makers that we think are doing the same thing. We've shared this cider grown mark that would start to define what we were trying to get across. People say orchard-based ciders, but get a grip. Every cider is orchard-based somewhere. Chinese concentrate or whatever. And fine ciders never really, it didn't bring our chimes at all.
And it sounds snobby, which we're not.
And cider grown, which makes people wonder what the hell we're talking about. We thought we might be able to get around to their thinking or understanding what the sort of general principles and practices behind the making of this cider are, which means that it is totally based on the fruit that we grow for the purpose.
One important sort of concrete thing about growing for cider is you don't pick them when they're snappy and have a wonderful American splashy bite like you see on TV. You pick them when they're soft, when the sugar in them has reached its absolute maximum, because that's where you get the rich flavor and the alcohol. And the kind of apples that we grow here that were developed over in some cases centuries for cider making have those particular features. Although if you bit into them in the field, you wouldn't necessarily pick up that crazy sugar, because the tannins in them are so bitter, you would feel like you're licking a penny and the sugar doesn't appear.
Or the acids are so sharp.
Or the acids are so sharp. I mean, they're weird, which is why, it was the original gamble was such a gamble. But compared to the certainty of going broke growing Macintosh, it seemed like a smart way forward.
And I was amazed at how hard it was to just shift my whole thinking and to get my mind around the unequivocal fact, that components of value in a cider apple are different from the components of value in a dessert or culinary apple. When we pick our apples, first of all, most of it comes off the ground because we want that last degree of ripeness.
They've just been shaken down, though. They haven't been sitting on the ground.
Yeah.
Yes, no, right. And we encourage grass under our trees. We don't have big weed-free strips because we want the apples to have something gentle that land on and lie on for a little bit, for that very short period that Lulu was talking about. But then when we get them in from the field in the bins, they want to go to the press. They do not want to go into any time of storage. They're ready to roll right then. And
our shorthand for the nutshell description of the cider we regard as our trademark is FHC. And by FHC, we mean Farnum Hill ciders. And what that means is flavors like pineapple, citrus, a certain herbal quality, black tea, a lot of unexpected and kind of eventful flavor events in the mouth. And ripe apple does infuse the whole thing, but it's not the first thing you think of. And back in the day when we were first taking this stuff out to the public, people were like, that's not cider. It doesn't taste like apple. And of course, all that meant was that they live in a country that had prohibition and forgot its cider tradition.
What Lulu gracefully left out of that description of the flavors and aromas is that we also like a tiny bit of not what the beer guys call funk. We don't want really like stink.
Right.
I mean, you get people go, oh, I love the funk. And oh boy, you say, oh my God, something's gone wrong. But a friendly hint of the outdoors, or maybe a bit of
the earth,
the barnyard, but not your barnyard, the barnyard at some great distance where you can't even quite identify that aroma that if you really thought hard, you'd be able to name.
And in our slightly off-dry farmhouse, which other people regard as absolutely dead dry, it is a little huggier, a little more forthcoming than our absolutely dry ciders. But compared to the bulk of what's in the market, it's just PDD, pretty damn dry. Anyway, this is the farmhouse is the only off-dry cider we have out there at the moment, and it's barely off-dry. But you'll get, it's also lower in alcohol than our others. It's 6.5% instead of 7.5 to 8%.
Right.
And it's but compared to a lot of the ciders on the marketplace, it's still relatively high, the ABV, which is why we try to make sure that it's not served in pint glasses too freely, right. Because people don't necessarily know that not every cider, but this is what the apples make. We don't do anything to raise the alcohol at all. And but the apples are so sugar heavy because they've developed to make cider that they will produce 6 to 8% alcohol. That's what they'll do.
About any of this stuff in the marketplace, because it still has to have that thing. It's got to be delicious in some way to reach enough people that they want to keep drinking it. And so, I mean, part of our objective that Lulu's so well described, what we're looking for, one of the things that we're really looking for is a clean and sort of happy finish, which actually with cider making is one of the hardest things.
Appetizing finish.
And we don't want somebody to say, "That's really great. Can I have a glass of water, please?"
Right.
We think, and in the same way, we don't want to be talking about peaches and cats and barnyards and pineapples. First words we want to say is, "Oh, here, that bottle's empty. Should we get another one?"
Yeah.
I mean, whatever. We're looking for people to notice that they like it before they even start thinking about it, and that's pretty tall order.
And I know for me, from my perspective, whenever I drink cider, which is often, and I'm more of a Normandy cider. That's what I've been drinking growing up. That was what I liked, and it's really just
know how to do funk, do they not? Oh.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness, delicious. Yeah.
But in that sense, there's something. It's just so refreshing immediately, and I think that's more to the point where you're thinking of like, I just want, by the time you pick up the glass for the bottle to look at it, it's already empty because it's just been, thirst quenching, and that's sort of the idea. You want it to be clean and subtle and, easily quaffable, and that's sort of everything that you guys are doing. And that's what the aim is. And for me, that's sort of that's what I get out of them. Anyway, that's just personal opinion, but that's.
Well, we both of us had at different times with, shocking to us experience with a sommelier or restaurant person or chef where we're trying to kind of introduce them to the idea, and you pull the cork and their head snaps around. And they say, "My goodness, that's cider?"
Yeah, it smells so good.
Because the thing just leaps out. You think, Is that okay? No, but it's
the wine of the West, right?
That's it. It's the wine of the West. Exactly. So we should probably explain that.
Yeah.
In England, the west of England is famous for its cider, and the expression for cider for a long time in England has been the wine of the West, because it is made like wine, discussed like wine, and fought over like wine. They're pretty locally proud out there.
One more thing I want to say about this.
Of course, yeah.
Which is that it is usually marginally more tannic. It has marginally more astringency and bitterness, even though it's lighter in every other way. And that's because when we first started putting this stuff out, we were trying to call it our cheap and cheerful. Of course, none of our stuff can be compared to anything else as cheap and cheerful.
It's very cheerful, but it's not very cheap.
Right. We were trying to introduce people to the notion of tannic ciders. And so we flicked the tannic character forward a little bit. And we've always liked it, so it stays there. And by flicking it, I just mean this is blending with
and to that point, just as with all of them you've been discussing, it's very much processed in the same way as wine. And, the care you put in is in the final product. And ultimately, that's why you have those prices that vary so much with wine. And they are expressive of, the care given to the grapes, and just as you guys do with the apples. So I mean.
Yeah, and the time. I mean, we cannot turn it over on a beer schedule. So right. the ordinary rivalry between beer and cider, which a lot of the more famous ciders do, successfully compete, but it's partly because they have learned to make their product very fast.
Yeah.
But we can't do that. These juices just don't come into their own fast. They just don't. And so you just have to be patient and shut up and try to nurse them along until they arrive.
Thank you so much for taking the time with me. I really do appreciate that. I love all the new products. Obviously, if anybody that watches is interested, please contact your local rep. We're happy to get these to you in any way, shape, or form as fast as possible. But again, thank you, Louisa, Steve. Thank you guys so much.
Yes, thank you so much, Nick.
Well, I mean, I'd encourage anybody who sees this, find out where Easterly Wines is delivering. You can get the cider. Their wine's a pretty good bet too.
Yeah.
These guys are great. We're very grateful for their efforts in Maine, and we are a little fussy about who we sell this stuff through. So,
yeah. Well, I'm glad that we passed the test anyway. Well, again,
yep. We want the buyers to call you, and we want the consumers to know that wherever you're delivering is a good place.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And again, thank you everybody that watched. And yeah, cheers. Drink well. See you next week. Blah, blah, blah.
Cheers. Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, thanks.